Sure. Hi, my name is Aaron Kramer. I'm an artist here in Los Angeles, and we're here at Cal State Los Angeles campus, and we are at the Diverted Destructions 14. This is my third or fourth show that I've done with Liz's Loft, as well as the Diverted Destruction show. And the work I'm representing today is all mechanical, actually, and it's kinetic stuff made out of recycled materials.
So a very important part of your work is the interactiveness of your pieces. How you start your pieces, where this inspiration comes from?
Sure.
Do you have maybe a particular idea and then trying to find it in materials,
Sure.
or you are actually following the materials when you are developing those?
That's a very good question. My kinetic work often starts with a mechanism. So I love mechanisms. I love crankshafts and cam lifters and gears that mesh. And there's something that brings me back to my childhood about going to arcades and other places where there was great mechanical fare for a nickel. So I'm interested in the mechanism, but what drives me is the interactivity that people have with the work. So there's a very direct relationship when you are turning the crank and something is revealing itself. It's kind of like you're performing the magic trick, and then you're revealing it to yourself. So I really enjoy this direct relationship with the art. It gets people more involved in the art, and then they start. They're first kind of brought in by the movement, and then they start to kind of look closer at the materials that it's made out of, and that's like this extra bonus to me, that it's made out of trash. And the accessibility of the trash that I'm using in the work is really important too, because I want it to be relatively identifiable. I want you to see that, that was an old container from Comet, or it was a milk container. But also I want to blur the line too between the kind of the found and the fabricated. So there are times when people are like, wait, this is familiar, but I'm not quite sure. And then throughout my work in general, I've used trash for years. So my motto is, trash is the failure of imagination. And by that I mean that we have so much that we don't use, we throw away, that's perfectly usable in terms of other creative uses. It's just our lack of creativity that is holding us back from being a zero waste society. So how can I get people to think differently about trash, and how can I get people to maybe think about what they're throwing out and maybe conserve a resource or use a resource as a next in its next iteration?
So your works have that political aspect, or like political attitude towards the environmental.
Yes, but I found years ago that if I preach a message right off from you need to conserve, recycle, reuse, that it's a bit overbearing, and it also gets in the way of selling work, because ultimately I'm a working artist and I wanna sell the work. So if I were to say, for example, here's a lampshade I made out of recycled coffee stirrers, and I hand it to you, immediately your thought goes to recycled coffee stirrers. So you're saying that somebody stirred up their coffee, they licked it, and they threw it in the trash, and then you made something out of it, and your hand. So that has an ew factor to it. What I want is the ooh factor. So the ooh factor comes from, here's this beautiful object. The silhouette of it is gorgeous. The meticulous methodology that went into making it, the woven aesthetic, the beauty of the construction, the craft of it is impeccable. And then, as a tertiary thing, I say to you, and it's made from recycled materials, there's that aha moment that occurs, which is the sell. And at that point then, they've shifted their mind about what trash is. Trash is no longer ew, it's ooh. So that's been a methodology of mine for years. So all of my work, whether it's a cork chair, the silhouette of the chair is a beautiful 1920s looking chair that you see from a distance, and then you come closer and you see this repetition of pattern on it, and then you realize, oh my God, that's made out of wine corks. It's all wine corks. That's incredible. So there's that ooh and then the wow. So that's
It's really nicely together. I like that. I think I'm gonna use all of that. For me, like the biggest impression of your work is the joyfulness of this apocalyptic, like I don't know, materials. Everything is kind of like, but it has that joyful moment. How much that is important for you?
Yeah, joy is very important to me. I feel like art that takes itself too seriously is kind of like an inside joke that it's only for very special people. I want my art to appeal to the widest range possible. And I know I've hit my sweet spot when a child comes up to my work and they want to touch it, they're compelled to make something happen. Because then I know I've kind of hit the ultimate audience, which is somebody whose mind I can change, and someone also who will grow up to be a collector at some point in time too.
That's beautiful. And we are now at the University Gallery. This is the first time that Diverted construction is happening in a university environment and setup. And how you feel about educational aspect of this show as well?
I think it's imperative. I'm an educator. I teach high school art. I started a summer camp for kids based on using recycled materials to make stuff from. I think it's imperative that we educate a whole nother generation to not think about things as a throwaway object, and to really consider what they put in the trash. I drive my kids crazy every day when I wash out a Ziploc bag after I've used it once. I'm like, oh, Dad, you're doing that again, but I guarantee you, 20 years from now, they'll be thinking about that. So you have to set you set the example for the generation that's in front of you. Yeah.
So you participated also in a workshop here, and it Loft at Liz's. And how do you feel about that experience of sharing that, like, creative space of creating something with others, and especially like with other artists? There are some really nice conversations.
I think there are, and I think unfortunately we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so it's difficult to exchange information one-on-one or in a small group setting. But regardless, when I'm kind of in that educator mode, when I'm teaching somebody how to bend a piece of wire or how to maybe make a connection that doesn't involve glue, I'm kind of at my best. I think I'm helping people learn to adapt to the materials, and like I teach a robotics course, or I'm a mentor for a robotics team, and oftentimes these kids who come from a privileged background I need to order this thing in order to move forward. And yesterday I had a conversation with these kids, and no, you don't. There's a room full of materials here. You just need to adapt to the materials you have in hand. And let me show you how we can do that. They wanted to figure out how to lift something. I'm like, well, let's just take a bar, for example, and you lift it like a fulcrum and a lever, and we create a quick lever, and then where's the force applied? And so by introducing other materials that are not this exact thing, and it gives kids the ability to be able to adapt to the world around them. And most of our consumerism is based on, I need that thing, I need that black box that does the thing. And so they're obsessed with that thing. But sometimes when I was growing up, I would be obsessed with a thing, but I'd make the next best thing in my garage out of scrap that I pulled out of a trash can. And my go-karts were even cooler than the other kids who could buy the go-kart. My go-karts were made out of crate trash.
That's perfect. Actually, going back to your artistic practice in general, we see here a variety of sculptures, from very small pieces to some very bigger pieces. But I assume you have also, in your artistic practice, different installations. How that variety of your work relates to maybe what we have here, and what you are maybe preparing for some future shows or something?
Sure. So I do a variety of work. I'm a painter, I'm a wordsmith, I'm a woodworker. I work with new get on my bully pulpit and promote, I do. But for, in general, I work now with clients and architects, designers, hotels, and I create work for private individuals and public projects. I like big scale. I always want to see my work bigger. Sometimes I work on something that's small, but it becomes a maquette for a larger object that I'm proposing to somebody. So I have a future show coming up in Cincinnati at a museum there in 2024, and it's all going to be recycled kinetic work. So this is kind of this primed the pump for me in terms of this show. And the body of work I created here was with an emphasis on what you find in your daily recycling bin. I worked really hard at kind of curating my trash and saying what could make it into a piece and what's interesting. And part of that is driven by the properties of the particular material, as well as the aesthetic of the material or the aesthetic of the thing. So it could be an interesting container that I like, or it could be that that particular plastic is highly malleable, like a number one plastic. You can heat it up with hot water and it suddenly becomes very pliable, and seconds later when it cools down it forms a shape. So I wanted to play with that. I've always wanted to play with the idea of dry cleaning bags and that really thin plastic that's almost silky smooth, and what would happen if I made an inflatable piece out of it. And so I did. I made my own inflatable elephant that talks about the impermanence of natural resource or animals like the elephant, but then also speaks to just the mechanical properties of inflating something and then having it slowly deflate too.
It's beautiful. I really like, for example, in some of those pieces, like how different objects are like moving differently, and you obviously were thinking about all these details.
Yeah.
Would it be too ambitious to ask you for like, what would be your kind of like message for the people who are like students right now, who are future generation? What is the main tragedy that we have about art or about?
The message I have often for students in general and young people is to iterate. And there's a design methodology called design thinking, and it basically goes, you have a client. It's always best when you have a client. Art is best when you have a client. If you do it for yourself, you can be a critical client, but it's always best when you're kind of doing it for an audience. So you're starting with a client, and then you have an empathetic response to that client. You kind of see what that client needs. Then you take that analysis and you start prototyping. You create your first iteration of whatever the solution to that problem will be. You then iterate, and then you've created your prototype, and then you test it. And then typically your first one out of the box won't be successful. And being comfortable with failure, failure is the direct guidepost to success. And so fail faster, I often tell them, and you'll get to where you want to be. So then you take that failure, you now analyze what went wrong, where the failure, whether it was a friction or something just didn't hold together, and then you go back to the drawing board, you iterate again, you prototype, you test it, you fail, prototype, test, fail, in that sequence until you get to a result which hopefully, if you've done your research in the beginning, as far as the empathy in the client, you then end up at a solution which is solving the problem overall. And it solves it in a unique way that only you could create. So fail faster, that's my motto.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very cool, and it's amazing how a variety of artists have different approaches, and how there are like beautiful dialogues between. How you feel about your artwork being in this setup, in this like environment?
I love having my artwork out in the public sphere because people get to interact with it. I started out my career doing shows all around the country that were wholesale only. So I created a line of objects that I was selling. They were made out of recycling materials. I was selling to galleries and stores. And so I would have the gallery owners come in and purchase directly from me. And I could get that great interaction of like the gallery owner saying, oh, my client is going to love this when I get into my store. Well, the second 10 years of my career, I actually was going out in my van and driving around the country and going to the highest end contemporary craft and art shows that I could. And that was where the real magic happens, when you have a family of 4 come into your booth and the little kids are drawn to the shiny object that moves and the adults are drawn to the objects on the wall, and you get that immediate feedback loop of how your art is succeeding in the marketplace. For me, that's really the juice that kind of keeps driving me. So for here, when I see people the other night interacting with the work and being brave enough to turn that handle and see what happens and see that magic unfold in front of them, it's the purest sense of what I'm hoping for in terms of my artwork.
That's beautiful. I think that Mika actually said the very interesting conclusion of the idea that a variety of these artists who are included in this show brings all very different approaches and kind of like completely break our tragedy about what is recycled art. For
Sure.
you, I think it's definitely the interaction that is created.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I would. I think there's one through line which I see in a lot of the work, and it's a repetition of form, and it's a basic kind of design principle, the muchness, and that gives you a real sense of like, wow, somebody threw a lot of that thing away, which there's no such thing as away when we're on a planet. Unless you shoot it out into space, it's all still here, but people still say, oh, I'm going to throw my trash away. That doesn't make sense. But the work I see here has this almost fetishistic quality to it, where people they're analyzing that material, seeing what the material can do, seeing how far they can push that material to failure or not, and then kind of capitalizing on that unique property, and then in multiples generating this iterative work, which is of great scale, which I always enjoy. I love muchness, and I'm not a minimalist by any means. And so when I see somebody who kind of obsessively has been connecting tubes together with wire in between to create these tessellated forms, like, well, that not only did it take an extended vision, but it also took a start. You had to start putting some things together and say, this seems like a compelling form, and I'm going to go forward and get to the hard part, which is the middle slog of any art process, where you're trying to create something larger and then get it across the finish line to the point where it's presented in the gallery.
I'm going to cut a lot of pieces. You nailed
Sure.
this one. I really love what I have. Would you like to add something that I didn't ask you?
So some of the work that I do uses found objects, and one of the greatest examples I can think of what I'm speaking of is a headboard that I made out of broom handles. And for years I would be driving on garbage day, I'd drive down the streets and I'd see broom handles sticking out of garbage cans because they didn't fit in the garbage can. But then when you look closer to broom handle, you see the evidence of hand. You see the evidence of the human interaction with that broom handle. It's worn down the paint in the best case scenario of the broom handle. So I started collecting them, and I made a headboard for a bed out of the broom handles. And the thing I love about that particular piece is that you can see the worn, the physical skin on contact of that broom handle in evidence on most of those handles. And the rainbow of colors that came in, and you think about the hours spent of those individuals using that particular tool until they perceived it to be done and goes into the trash. And then I elevate that because I feel like there's a secret message that materials are trying to tell us. There's a kind of a hidden purpose behind almost all materials, and so that's one of the things I'm trying to communicate.
Thank you so much for that. That's like, you nailed this one as well. I mean, everything you said, it's great.
Good.
Would you like to say more or something? I think we have
I think we
really
have
great
enough.
material here.
I'm
That's
so glad you
amazing.
came.
Good.
I'm so glad. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so
yeah,
much for
yeah.
this.
You're welcome.